Good afternoon, everyone. I think my job here is, I'll do a very short presentation of Ilona, and I'll let you speak a little bit, but I think my job in one sense would be to make you comment on the elections and how kind of the security agenda will be present, in the October elections. For you who don't know Ilona, she's a really impressive person. I totally agree with Ted. Ilona is the co-founder of, the founder of Igarapé Institute, which is, I like the slogan, it's a think and do think. So a mix of research center, right, and sort of an NGO, really engaged in the debates about public security, not only in Brazil, but in other corners of the world, but mostly in Brazil, based in Rio. And Ilona is also the co-founder of Agora, which is a movement that is trying to renew Brazilian politics. There are a number of Agora members who will be running for Congress at the state and federal level. And I think these two agendas are very intertwined. Yeah. So without further ado, let me leave the floor to you. I think we can do something like 15 minutes, and then I'll ask you a few questions and we'll go to Q&A. Okay.
So thank you very much. First to Ted and to the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce, to Roberto that actually introduced me to Ted and to the whole team here. So it's a pleasure to be in New York with the Brazilian community. And the first question I would like to ask is how many people here are Brazilian? Just to get a sense of the crowd, so the majority. And how many people do not speak Portuguese? Okay, I'm asking this because we have some special guests here today. I'm in a course at the Columbia University with mayors. I'm kind of just following them because I'm a partner in one of these mayors. But I would like in the end to introduce some of the projects that Paula, who's the mayor of Pelotas, is doing. But I also have here the former police chief of Rio de Janeiro, who we have the pleasure to work with, and Eduardo Leite. I just want to say all my colleagues from the course, who is also a former mayor of Pelotas. Leonardo Branco, who is a reporter from Exame, who is following the course. Guilherme from the Federation of Industries of Rio de Janeiro. Giovanna, from the she's a secretary of planning for the city of Niterói. Who else am I missing from us? I think that's all. Yeah. So this group is with us this week here in New York, so we took the opportunity to come. So to warm up the conversation, I'll do a brief overview of public security in Brazil. Public security is a concept that in English it would be like public safety plus policing plus judiciary in the criminal justice side. So we don't really talk about public security here, but it's a concept that we use in Brazil. So first, just a way of introduction. We are a think and do tank, and that's because we do research, but also we try to act through new technologies and demonstration projects to influence public policy, and we do also advocacy and communications on issues on security, justice, and development. As Roberto said, we're based in Brazil, but we have we say we want to be a voice from the South that actually dialogue to the North on equal terms. So we kind of have a big challenge in front of us, which is to include the Global South in the debate. And we do try to foster connections between agendas, sectors, and convene to change, to transformative agendas. So just a way of introduction, I think you all know our region, but it's important to highlight that Latin America is the only region in the world where homicide and violence is actually growing. So we have 8% of the world's population, 38% of the world's homicides. 3 countries account for 1/5 of those. And it's important to say Brazil is number 1, but Mexico, Colombia are also responsible for a large number. We have to talk about this because in general, this is not in the news as a reason why we're not developed we're always developing as a region, but we don't get there. And for me, violence and the cost of violence and all that is implicit there, it's a really big burden to where we want to just get to. Just to take a quick look in Brazil, so we are the number 1 country when it comes to absolute numbers of homicide in the world, and this is there for many, many years. This is not new. So around 62,000 people die violently every year. Over 70% of those by firearms. When you look, most of them are young people, below 24 years old. It's a little bit over 50%. So when you see the conviction and when you see what's going on with this violent crime, very few people actually get in jail when they commit crimes against life in Brazil. So we're going to talk about that. So it's an important figure to keep in mind. So less than 10% conviction, and this number is not a number that I can precisely tell you because it doesn't exist. So this is several pieces of survey that gets to an estimate. And we have, several also surveys just stating the economic burden of crime. So the latest one that was launched, and we participated with the Secretary of Special Issues of the Presidency of Brazil, says that it's roughly $79 billion, which is almost 4.5% of our GDP. So it's a huge issue for the country. When you look into the penal system, because we have the problem, and we have also one of the two responses. You have police, you have prison, and we're going to talk about what else can be done, but that's what people look at. We have the third prison population in the world after the US and China, so over 700,000 people. So around 40% waiting, pre-trial detainees waiting to be tried. 55% are considered, young people, 18 to 29. Only 15% are working while they're in prison, and this is generally like cleaning the prison's facilities. Of those that are working, 74% are paid less than minimum wage. This means the Constitution allows for people in prison to receive less. Black majority. Very uneducated population, so 61% did not complete basic education, and if you go to, it's 75% that did not complete middle school, which is ensino médio here. Is it middle school? High school. So it's very uneducated population there, and we have almost double the size of the prison population than the places we have for them. So it's a huge deficit of places. And everyone, and in the elections debate, everyone is asking to increase penalties, increasing just more people in jail. But when we look at the indicators, this prison population has been booming in the last years, and the impact is none in criminality, contrary. So it's not working. We have to ask why this is not working. Are we imprisoning the right people? So it's a good question for the debate. And as you saw before, we don't condemn people that commit crimes against life. So we have to think who is in prison then. So how did we get there? So very complex problem. That's one of our biggest issues. It's a very complex problem that demands nuanced and integrated solutions, but we don't have a governance in this public security and criminal justice system. So we're starting to develop one now in Brazil. So we'll come back to that. A very narrow understanding. People understand public security as police in Brazil, and now police plus prison. But there are many institutions that are part of the system, starting with prevention, starting with the local level, that is absent, almost absent, in terms of public policies to start preventing crime, and also involving the judiciary, the prosecutors, and so on. So we always focus and kind of blame, and the police is there for the good and for the bad in Brazil, and nobody else is really held accountable to these days. So failure to prioritize. So election after election, we now see the issue at the stage, but I would say in a very negative way, because it just tries to, bring magical solutions, not real solutions. We're not educating the population about what can really be done, what are the root causes. We're just using these issues to polarize the debate. And I just touched that, not a lot of investment in prevention. And of course, add that to the sharp economic crisis and the amazing political crisis that we're living in the last years, that I think everyone is familiar with. So moving forward, we see I need, and that's not rocket science, but we need evidence-based policies in Brazil in terms of, all sectors would benefit from an evidence-based approach. It's not only public security, but here we're dealing really with life and death every day, and we don't use in general interventions with a track record. Also a comprehensive approach where we have prevention and repression, and I would just put the word intelligent prevention and intelligent repression there, looking into mitigating the risk factors, not only the symptoms, and of course for me the most important, which is generally what we lack these days, courageous leadership that will take the issues seriously and to do, for example, to really be able to invest. People will have to take pension reform. On the one hand, on the other hand, we're going to have to deal with gun control, drug policy. So these are not popular issues to politicians to deal with. And if we don't have courageous leadership to move forward on those, I think we're going to still, have the crisis of security just deepening in the next year. So these are basic principles to go ahead. So prioritizing. We have several crimes, several indicators, but we have to prioritize very few resources. We spend a lot in public security. We won't have more money to spend in public security. We have a totally, as all know, fiscal deficit. So we have to prioritize. And for us, when we see, we need to start with violent crimes, because those are the crimes that you can't really, you can't get a life back. So we have to start there. Although we understand property crime is really important, raise perception, but in terms of public policy, you have to emphasize violent crime. Police corruption, because unfortunately this is a big part of also, I think, in a democratic state, if you have an example of the agents that should enforce the law, if they don't follow the law. So the whole model starts to fade as well. So this is a big issue. And organized crime, which is interlinked, and what we know from Lava Jato and other operations is that you can follow the money, you can get to these criminal organizations, but it's also a lot of political will involved there. And of course, it's a very life-threatening issue to deal when you're in the political level. So very briefly, but these priority areas are part of agendas that we build. So the Igarapé Institute, every election year, together with partners, we build priority agendas for the country, for the city level, for the state level. So these are key priorities for what we're going to be launching. It will be after the World Cup, but the World Cup ended before for Brazil. So we're kind of okay, so we're ready to launch the agenda next week, because Brazil is going to, we're going to watch, but we're not that excited. So these priority areas, first of all, governance. It's a boring issue, but it's very important, and I'll go back to that also. Violence prevention, involving municipalities into this agenda is a key priority. Smarter policing, and this I'm talking about the use of technology, but also hotspot policing. I would say CompStat, putting a premium on investigation, intelligence, and prevention, and that's not the way our police is geared in Brazil. Penitentiary system reform, which I mentioned the figures, but it's also most of the organized crime groups are born and manage crime from within the system. So the state as a whole, like the Brazilian state, is responsible for what's going on for decades, and they don't take action. And I say that because nobody wants to deal. These places are horrible. They recruit, their recruitment, and there's so much technology and management of tools that you can apply to not allow that to happen. But this is a very serious issue. Firearm and ammunition control, which is one of the favorite issues for the candidates. It's very polemic in our country, but all surveyed research, I know here is also very polemic. We're ready to discuss. Drug policy reform, also because when you see the Brazilian population, prison population increase, there was a change in the law, the drug policy law, that was supposed to modernize the law in 2006. What happened is that it just didn't give a clear distinction between users and drug traffickers, and increased the penalties for drug traffickers. Our prison population spiked after that, so we have around 1/3 of the male in the prison system just they're arrested for drug charges, and in the female it's over 62%. So it's huge in terms of prison population, and we're not talking about violent drug traffickers. We're talking about just a very small amounts of drugs being, sold or transported and so on. That's what the research shows. And we need for, very urgently coordination, intelligence to fight organized crime and police corruption, just given the size also of the responsibility we have. So federal government responses. So lately, we always have national public security plans being launched, never implemented. We only had one that was actually implemented further during the first Lula administration, was PRONASSE, but we had several plans launched and did not get to be implemented. This one was launched right after the rebellions, the prison, we had several crises in the prison system. This was launched after by the former Minister Alexandre de Moraes, who's in the Supreme Court today, and it changed over all the ministries, but never also got the right funding or backing. So we have a federal task force against organized crime in Rio, given the situation of the state, and there are problems with integration here, but advancing integration between the prosecutors and the federal police. We can go back there. We have, for the first time in Brazilian history, democratic history, the federal intervention in the security of the state of Rio, which is also tricky. And we just today, and President Temer allowed the law that created formerly the Public Security Ministry and the single public security SUSP program. Like it's like our health system for the public security system. So it's like a first time an intent to coordinate the work of the federal level in Brazil. So this is promising, but we don't have funds to just support the federal government engagement in that yet. There are ways, several things being discussed at the moment, but we haven't yet to answer. Am I with the 15? It's 15. Done. So final slide before I pass there. So key risks in 2018, 2019. So we have an elections, and this is security and corruption is really, I would say, are the two key themes for the elections, coming up elections, and there is this ultra-right rhetoric on like how to fight crime, which is with more violent, and we can discuss why I think this doesn't work. Political scandal and economic shocks, because it's really that power doesn't leave a vacuum, and when you have crisis in leadership, you know what's going on. So we have a crisis in leadership in all levels, and at my state, the Rio state, it's even more complicated because we have a weak mayor, we have inexistent governor, and the federal level is also suffering with several political scandals and crises. Corporativism within the public security sector, so the next governors will have to touch issues such as pension reform for the public security sector and others, and this is very unpopular and can generate rebellions and other issues. A very big resistance to evidence-based and to modernize, to bring more transparency to public policies, and weaken and polarize civil society. And we can also discuss why we're in the situation that when we most need civil society, we can't get civil society to be a strong voice with I would say, a common agenda. This is being very hard. Polarization is at the extreme. So I'll stop here. I'll pass to Roberto.
Thank you so much. So before I ask you about more how this intersects with the elections, I'll start with a very brief introduction. And I think what is really new now is that the security debate is really in the presidential campaign, right? We haven't seen this before. I think there are three key topics in the presidential campaign: security, corruption, and the economy. And I think we were seeing a trajectory in 2018. It started in January when the Temer administration decided to intervene in Rio when it became clear that the pension reform would not happen. Then we had the murder of Marielle. We have some localized episodes like the police women who killed a robber in front of the school, and now she's a candidate. Clearly, the issue escalated to the national level very easily. And usually the explanation for that is that, violence is now overwhelming in Brazil, people are more concerned about violence. But when you look at the data, the polling data, the story seems more complicated. I was looking at Ibope, for instance. Ibope does a survey, a polling actually, every year asking people what are the top 3 concerns you have in Brazil. And in 2018, 4 in every 10 Brazilians said security, one of them. In 2014, when Dilma was elected, it was the exact same number, roughly 40%. Before, I think, 2006, 2010, it was, you see that you haven't seen like a huge increase in the perception of how important security is for people's lives. So maybe there's another explanation. My explanation is Bolsonaro. You have a guy that from, since I would say mid-2017, when the political system in Brazil was collapsing, he was from the beginning talking about, guns, etc. And now we have Alckmin, Ciro trying to react to this and to put this on the agenda. It's a long explanation for my question, which is, this is clearly the way to move forward, but how you convince a voter that it's being told, you're feeling insecure, I'll give you a gun. How you convince a voter that institution building is the right answer. How you transform this message. I think it is a huge challenge for Agora as well. How you transform this message into an electoral slogan, if you know what I mean.
Because that's the $1 million question, but I think this is the most important thing. We've been struggling with that, and I mean, I put in the list Veloso, who is here as a former police chief. I mean, we talk a lot about this. First, I think we have to educate our people, and I think the problem of leadership in our country is one that we don't want to tell people the truth, right? So I think the only way to fight, I would say, the magical solutions that will bring us more problems than solutions themselves, will be selling a message of hope. The issue is that, you can imagine, we have a lot of male candidates, 2 female candidates, and they will probably bring a more, I would say, nuanced view on the public security arena. But they are women, like as I am, and because I believe Veloso can tell his opinion afterwards, but I believe he would agree with most of the things I'm saying here, because we do these agendas with police and with prosecutors, with defenders and judges, but the population don't have access to that. So what we're doing now is that we have the technical work, but we're launching communication campaigns, like in the month of September, with influencers, and that's not celebrities per se, but the influencers across all the spectrum, with a motto of this more like, don't let fear decide your vote. Know how to turn the game. So we want to just give people quick wins in terms of what is prevention, like how can they act to prevent violence, school evasion, early childhood intervention, so they can also be part of the changing the game, smarter policing, so things that people would understand the concept, but I think this can only be done with a message of hope, with a message of, I would say, a freedom. I mean, I found out in my work that freedom is not a value for Brazilians as I thought it was. Like I value my freedom very much, but people don't realize that in this issue of public and private security, that not going out at night, as we don't go in Rio anymore to many places, not being able to walk at night in streets, they don't really think about what's going on. I mean, they're free, they're really opting out of like being free to move, being free to, I mean, I hope we don't opt out of being free to speak and being free to demonstrate, and if we go to a more, I would say, authoritarian kind of government, and I believe the only way to do this is to change the new generation that is very disenchanted, and this issue will go hand in hand with the kind of renewal of the leadership of our country as a whole. So communications, empathy, hope, and I hope some of the candidates can realize that before it's too late.
So let's talk about that, and then I'll open for questions. When you look at, I was looking at the proposals on public security, you spoke about Bolsonaro, how just giving arms to people is, I mean, the research clearly shows that this only increases violence in the short and the long run. But if you look at what people like Alckmin have been saying, or even Ciro, it's a lot, there's a lot of talk about integrating and in the case of Alckmin, he's proposing to create a national intelligence agency where militaries will work with, police to share intelligence. And to a certain extent, this will mean, broadening the mandate that the militaries have to deal with public security. We've seen this increase, I would say, since Brazil's mission to Haiti, that the military, the role of the militaries in public security has been increasing, now with the interventions in Rio, etc. And in some places like Mexico, it ended in disaster, right? Do you think that, how can the militaries get involved? Do you think it's a positive way to respond to such a crisis?
Sure, I would say we have at Igarapé, we work with the military since our beginning because we have a whole peacekeeping program. So we have a very good cooperation in peacekeeping, civilian capacity, and issues around gender. So we train military, so we have that line. And what happened in Rio surprised them. So I have to say, by knowing the process and by following it very close, that they didn't know about it, they didn't want to do what they're doing. And they have been called several times, and it's not only in Rio, in several states we were just counting how many times the military was there to, combat a police strike or to do, to be called to do something that they're not trained for. And they're very aware of that in Brazil. Of course, there is inside the military, there will be a percentage of people that would agree that they have to be more proactive, but it's not the mainstream view of the military. But when you go to intelligence, and because the way our laws are structured, I do believe that having them, for example, the military are responsible for gun export in the country, for the whole, so if you want to, for the frontiers and so on. So sharing information, I think it's very positive. And what I would say from Alckmin and Ciro particularly, looking at their proposals, is that the proposals are technical. What they're missing there, I would say, is the prevention part, which they should come to New York and learn more about ComStat and what we've been dealing and being exposed this week and so on, because they would hear from people that, repression is important, but, your first mandate is to prevent crime and not just to act afterwards. So this mentality is not present in the strongman, let's say, apparatus in Brazil, and we want them to just be more aware that the soft part of security is cheaper, is much more productive and much more intelligent than the hard part. But apart from this criticism that I think can be built into the programs, it's more the rhetoric that is actually changing because of the hardliners, and they want to just try to kind of catch the votes from this side. When you talk to people doing their programs, because at Igarapé we sent our agendas for all the candidates, and we are open to receive anyone that wants to talk to us. So I spoke to, we've been speaking to the program managers for security for several campaigns, and they're very open to evidence-based policy, but because they're now fighting for votes, and the right-wing, I would say, the ultra-right-wing mode is capturing the zeitgeist of the fear of the population, and that's what they're changing, which is a disservice, because they should, and I understand politics is unfortunately it's still run that way. It's more like, okay, now we have to do this, but afterwards I think there's a lot of room to the kind of agenda that I'm presenting here with like 80% of the candidates today.
Any questions? I have a question.
So I think the way you actually put, the way you actually put in terms of like the importance dealing with violence first is critical. I mean, I grew up in Rio myself, right? And the most dangerous thing that you have in Rio is to leave home without money, right? Because you will get killed if you get robbed and you don't have any money to give away. So yes, trying to prioritize that. But the question is, first of all, if you could go a little bit deeper on the army intervention in Rio. I mean, is it actually working? And if it's a yes, why is it working? Are there any lessons there to learn, right? And two is that there is one part that you don't address, is that a very meaningful portion of the population that actually goes to violence, they grew up in an environment that is completely lawless, right? Beginning from where they live, right? I mean, favelas in Rio, there is no law there, right? I mean, the home where they live is, right? I mean, it's not registered anywhere. They don't pay taxes. The electricity is robbed. I mean, so they actually come from almost like a twilight zone, so to speak, right? So some of that should be how to legalize the lives of the people that actually go down in violence. And I didn't really see anything on the presentation because, again, it's a super hard issue to deal with, right? But are there any talks about this? How, discussions?
Talking about urban renewal or just
Exactly, right? I mean, if you go to South Africa, even if you go to the slums, right? I mean, they are registered. The homes are registered.
Sure.
Whoever lives in the house, there is an ownership sense, right? That doesn't exist in Brazil.
Totally. I mean, so I'll start with the intervention and then I go there. The intervention, I think that we have to understand it's an exceptional measure. It's very expensive. Brazil is broken, so I tell all the governors, don't wait for the military to come and save you, do your homework. They're not going to be able to do it, even if they wanted to do. There's no money to sustain the army engagement in public security, there's no training, but I'm just saying there's a very practical question here, which is expensive. And in terms of what they did in the past, which is more kind of contention, they just go and help, to patrol and so on. The results there in the past were really, there were no results, to be honest. Just a lot of improve the perception. Maybe, crime takes a little break from some activities, but they know the army will go away and things will get back because of the situation. But in Rio, this intervention is particularly different for one reason. Because of the weak governor at the moment, and I can say this very publicly, we have governors in jail. This one is being accused of several crimes, so probably you'll also be facing charges that can take him to jail. We don't know, but he's a suspect of several other trials. So there was no leadership whatsoever. So there was a reorganization of crime. And there was a very difficult job for anybody to enforce, even for the police to enforce. So the situation, I think, was very extreme, and that's why, for political reasons, and I think Roberto said the reason was political for the intervention in the presidential level, and that was like something to divert attention from a pension reform. But when you see practically what they did was to put someone there, a technical person, because the general that is the interventor, which is just nominated another one to be the secretary for public security, who's a very technical general. And what he's doing, and we're following super close, is that he's actually doing what a public secretary who should do, which would be getting the morale of the police back, and saying there is hierarchy, there is discipline, there is self-esteem, but also valuing the police themselves. The police was really unequipped, ill-trained, and so on. Trying to implement hotspot policing, which is also not in the culture of the police in Rio, and we are part of this situation. I'm just going to show this, photos speak more than so we at Igarapé, we mobilize the private sector to donate to the state of Rio the public security analysis system, which the city didn't have hotspot mapping until 2016. The state of Rio didn't have that, which is like unbelievable because other states that are poorer or less complicated in Brazil had. So the general adopted this as like, okay, evidence-based policing. We don't have a lot of resources. So he's changing the culture, which is like
So what is hotspot?
criminal, how to explain that in English, but crime is concentrated in the space and time, right? So just to deploy police cars and resources to prevent that. So it's just you emphasize the policing in where the hotspots are, okay, where the concentration of crimes are. So this is the Compstat system in New York, and it works everywhere. There's #1 policing activity in terms of results. So it's really widespread, but Rio didn't have that. So we were in another era. So the general is trying to change culture there and then trying to adopt a more evidence-based policing approach, and also securing that the civil police, because we have a two police system, which is complicated, I can explain, but one does patrolling and the other one does investigation, which is like a Brazilian invention that doesn't work, but it's almost impossible to change because of corporativism. But the army is actually trying to guarantee that the civil police can actually do the operations and imprison people, because there were several operations that would touch political targets and complicated, people that were involved either in the state congress, the municipal chambers, and they just couldn't do it because there was no political backing. So, for that sense, they're doing what they can do in a short term, but I don't think you can't replicate that, because the situation in Rio is really absolutely a chaos. So they are doing the best, but they want out in 31st September. I mean, I'm following that. They don't want to continue there, and they won't be able to continue for several reasons, and also because the president hopefully will need to pass reforms, and this is there's a constitutional issue there. When it comes to all the urban renewal and urban practice, in our prevention agenda, which is touches several lives, there's just from early childhood intervention, because it's proved that when you have exposure to violence when you're very young, you just get from the emotional, physical, but also neurological changes that can affect your behavior later in life. So the most effective investment in public security actually is to invest in early childhood, so like prevention. So this is number one in dollar saving, real saving, is that. So from that to school evasion to it's like land titles. I don't know how the right word is in English.
Land titles.
Yeah, so this is all part of an agenda that is an agenda for mayors at the local level. And the main challenge of our system is that we understand, because of the narrow understanding that security equals policing, we don't get mayors to look at the prevention as an integrated part and just advance on that, but it's part of our prevention agenda, and it's key, because then you can leverage so many other things from that. You're absolutely right. There are very few experiences that I can draw from in Brazil with land tenure, and I think this is a key point.
I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I know there are a few mayors and former mayors. If anyone wants to share, maybe Eduardo, can I put you on the spot? Or you guys, yeah, if you have, one policy, let me put a question. So if you had to, mention one policy that was very effective, or you thought was your best policy to address security at the municipal level, and policing in Brazil is usually at the state level. You have state police. Which one would you mention?
Well, at the municipal level, of course, the preventions programs about childhood, it's very important.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah, okay. I'm Eduardo. I'm the former mayor of Pelotas, a city in the southernmost state of Brazil. It's Rio Grande do Sul. It's near Uruguay. We are 350,000 inhabitants, so we're the third largest city in our state, and I'm now running for state government. So security and safety are the police are at the state level in Brazil, so it's more in my agenda now than when I was mayor. But the city hall there, my former vice mayor is the current mayor of Pelotas. She's here, Paula, and she's doing many things in this area, so she can talk more about that. What concerns me more, it's about rising the number of policemen in our state, and to make that, we had in the early 90s 32,000 policemen in our state, and now we have 16,000. so it decreased to a half part of what we had before, and the crime is more complex. The population has increased, and we have 50% of the number of policemen we had before. And part of that is because of our pension system. A policeman can be retired at 38 years old, you know, so he's going to live 50 years earning his pension, and that's why our state is broken. So I have to make a change on that, and this is very hard, as Ilona was saying. It's very hard to make that, but we have to do it. So we have to increase our number of policemen and to construct penitentiaries, right? Mm-hmm. That's the word in English, right? Because we have this, we need to create spaces, more spaces, and penitentiaries, and other things, of course, are very important. And we have to integrate the policy between the state and the municipalities for sure to make it more effective, doing safety in the cities. So it's not, we have to create this plan at the state level as well that we don't have now. We don't have a plan at state level for safety, so it's not integrated because we don't have any plan, and have to do the cities to make their own plans for sure. So maybe I can pass to Paula. I think she's going to speak in Portuguese, right? So Ilona can make the translation.
Peço desculpas por meu inglês não sustenta discurso, então, mas só quero dizer que, na verdade, como prefeita, me convenci de que a solução para a segurança pública no Brasil passa pelos municípios,
So as a mayor, she's convinced that public security, the solutions pass through the municipalities.
Pelo papel do prefeito em três ações, né? Na verdade, nós lançamos um plano municipal de segurança pública com 5 eixos. Pacto Pelotas pela Paz, nós chamamos.
So she launched a pact, Pelotas for Peace, so 5 axes, but she has 3 priorities.
Uma delas, a primeira, óbvia, é a prevenção, já que a gente precisa atuar na primeira infância, com metodologias socioeducacionais, identificando a violência precoce, depois também na escola, que é um grande centro de prevenção, e acompanhando esse jovem por toda a sua vida, né? São as políticas públicas municipais que podem agir sobre ele e prevenir a violência.
The first one is prevention, acting on early childhood, but also at school, and following the life of the adolescents, and to just apply public policies that could accompany these young people.
Mas o prefeito é também, sendo o líder municipal, ele tem a capacidade, né, deve ter a capacidade de integrar as forças policiais, ainda que o chefe das polícias seja o governador do estado, pela nossa Constituição. Quem está ali sobre o território, o líder no território é o prefeito, e ele tem essa função de integrar as forças policiais e não só. Todas as instituições que nós estamos fazendo em Pelotas, universidades, empresários, enfim, toda a sociedade integrada em torno da questão da segurança, né, e da luta por uma cultura de paz.
So since the mayor is like there in the territory, so he has the power to also integrate the work of the police forces, but also with the society, universities, business people, civil society as a whole.
Um outro aspecto importante é também que é muito desdenhado, é esquecido pelos prefeitos no Brasil, normalmente, que é a questão da polícia, do poder de polícia administrativa que tem as prefeituras. Ou seja, é preciso coibir os pequenos delitos que se tornarão grandes violências. Isso é muito inspirado no modelo de Nova York, né, na questão das janelas quebradas. Nós estamos propondo um código de convivência em Pelotas que pune, entre outras coisas, o consumo de álcool em via pública a partir de um certo horário da noite, que aqui é uma coisa super natural, mas para nós não é, está sendo bem polêmico.
Also to act with the administrative policing power that the municipalities have, trying to avoid the small, not crimes, but petty crimes, but also keeping just rules as a limit of until what time you can have alcohol in the streets and other things like this, just very based on also the New York model.
Enfim, nós criamos um observatório de segurança pública que vem acompanhando e colocando sobre o território todos os dados, tanto os dados da criminalidade, da atuação das polícias, quanto os dados da prevenção, para que a gente possa, a partir daí, né, das evidências científicas, traçar um planejamento de forma integrada com as polícias e com as secretarias da prefeitura que são envolvidas nessa causa: educação, saúde, assistência social, cultura.
We also create a public security observatory that integrates both data from crime but also from the prevention part, integrating the police with the secretaries of health, education and other arms of the municipality that are responsible for those.
Make a point.
Introduce yourself, Giovanna.
Thank you. My name is Giovanna Victor. I'm the Secretary of Planning of Niterói, which is a municipality just across the bay, Rio de Janeiro. We are part of the metropolitan area and have 500,000 inhabitants. I'd like to point out one thing is about the unemployment in Brazil. I think we have a huge growth in the last 4 years. Only in my city we lost 23,000 jobs in the last 4 years because of the shipyard crisis related to the oil and gas industry. So this is part of the informality market, you know. People have to eat, people have to bring things home. So not mention and implying that people will necessarily become criminals because they lost their jobs. But the informal market grows at this point, which make the whole society environment more deteriorated. So this is one thing that I'd like to point out: unemployment, huge rates in Brazil. And the other one is relating and make a connection about what happened in the election of Rio de Janeiro city and what we are about to see in Brazil. In Rio, we had a second turn that separated very strongly two extremes in politics, which is Freixo and Crivella. Extremely right and extreme left wings. What I'd like to point is that what we're seeing in Brazil now is maybe we have a second turn quite similar, especially if we have an extreme right wing and we don't know what to come in the other side. But the risk is, what you saw in Rio is that the one that wins doesn't have a lot of legitimacy. People vote against the other one. I don't agree at all with the other view, so I will vote for this one. So the one that wants, don't want with the legitimacy that we need now to run all these reforms that Ilona so brilliant mentioned. We need a strong leadership now to make reforms, structural reforms, and to make the social impact reforms, for instance, in security. So we are afraid now to see very separated voters, you know. So the attention is, we're having a meeting with the 11 candidates that are running now. A meeting from the National Friend of Mayors. It's a huge league that brought to Niterói about 150 mayors of largest city in Brazil. And we saw all the candidates there. And we could notice that for us, which knows, we have Ciro and Alckmin, which would be like the dream second run. Not because we love any of them, but at least the results could show a preference from the society. And not like we saw in Rio, the city of Rio, that was just like a no, I don't want Freixo, or I don't want a Crivella, so I'll vote for the other one. An example is that Crivella is about to get impeached as well. So we just passed in the chamber of the city of Rio de Janeiro the acceptance of his impeachment. So this is a huge crisis. That's why I'd like to point.
But just one comment on that, Giovanna. We have another enemy, I mean, public security, corruption, but also people in Brazil to vote is compulsory. But in the last elections at the municipal level, but also who is winning is abstention. It's blank. So and that of course favors the candidates that are more in the polls. So we have a huge issue. I think on the message of hope and all that for public security. On the one hand, we're going to do this through Igarapé, but with my civic hat, which is the Agora movement, we're going to do a huge campaign like people have to vote and go out and vote. And don't allow others to decide for you, because this is a major crisis that actually can decide the election. But that's what Giovanna was mentioning. Who will win will have less votes than the non-votes. So it's quite an extraordinary moment. And I think what is at stake at this election is much more than 4 years. It's where our country is heading to. So. We are lacking a vision. We're lacking really an agenda that people can look at and identify themselves. We are lacking kind of a united motto that can just get everyone at the same page, or at least the majority. And unfortunately, I don't see at the moment anyone able to articulate that, because they're more worried about destroying each other. And the candidates that are more, I would say, middle ground don't have the time on TV to just build on their views, and they don't have the same parties, coalitions to support them. So we are I would say, in a very, very dangerous moment that can define much more than 4 years. And I think that inside or outside, we have to try to find the middle ground and try to see that everyone will have to get to a point where you don't like everything, but you have to just choose the best person that could unite this country. Because we are seeing what's happening in the United States, we're seeing what's happening in several places in Brazil, and this is really damaging at the moment of great instability internationally as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just as a side question, do you think, you mentioned corruption as being, a source of widespread anti-establishment feeling in Brazil. To what extent do you think, when you have the president likely going to jail after he ends his term, to what extent do you think this drills down to the local level and people saying that everyone is corrupt? Why, if I'm a policeman in Pelotas, in Rio, in Niterói, why shouldn't I take, a 50 reais bribe while the big boys are getting, millions of? Obviously, there's a relationship. Do you deal with that? Do you have any answer to this type of dilemma?
Well, this is not new. I think I think we got to where we got because that's the practice for many decades. And now, since I would say 2013 onwards, there was like several just huge operations and at all levels. But I think we are very far from getting to the bottom of what's going on, because when you tell like municipal politics, it's very complicated. It's much more widespread than what we're seeing, unfortunately, and that of course also has a lot to do with the citizens. And when we talk about citizens empowerment and what can we do, I always say, well, start looking at yourself, because the laws are there. But first of all, like self-regulation, mutual regulation, and then there's the law, and that's how we have to start to review the values of the Brazilian citizens vis-a-vis what is corruption, what is my own behavior vis-a-vis the what we call the jeitinho brasileiro, which is just like the ways out of not doing the right thing because you think you're better than others. So I think this was always there. And for the first time in our public security agendas, like priority agendas, we're actually bringing corruption very high in terms of also intersections. But we learned a lot from these last operations. Lava Jato is of course the most famous one, but it is possible if you want to follow the money and get all the connections and just really do integrated work with all the problems that there are there. It is possible to dismantle criminal networks. So we can transfer that knowledge, and that's why when you say creating an intelligence unit, I think it's really that they're meaning. It's meaning that you have to put COAF, which is our fiscal. It's a very sophisticated, fiscal system and other agencies working together, like customs and so on, working together with police, and at that level in terms of exchange with the right military personnel in terms of how to get there, to be able to dismantle. And of course the state is part of that, unfortunately, at different levels. So the model is there, there is a new generation. The risks are also there because we are seeing an over-judicialization of our country. So there is an imbalance of the powers of the state today, because since we have a very corrupt Congress, a very corrupt executive level, so the judiciary is actually, the most important power these days. I hope we get also to a level where you can balance the powers. And of course we are afraid, and when I talk about the military, I mean, of course I know part of the military, but of course there are people very scared of military rule, and we don't want to become Mexico. We studied very close what happened to Mexico and how this also came into, just deteriorating even more the democratic situation there. So I would say we are at that moment where wrong choice will just stimulate more brain drain. Everyone that could leave Brazil, and people are leaving, and our friends are leaving, and we're saying, who is going to stay? And how long it takes to build capacity in that country. We're losing our capacity. So, and I'm trying to engage business people in Rio, and I say, I hope we don't all have to pack and go. And listen, we can, but maybe our kids will come back, and most people can't leave. So we have to do something, and I think it's a whole of society exercise. And the solutions will come from society. Because also politics is tainted in Brazil because of all these scandals and because of the ill practice. So if we don't support those that are willing to go in with the good ethos, and that's very hard because nobody wants to touch politics, we won't see the big country and the huge potential fulfilled. So my daily work is to try to fix politics, but at night, I'm trying to mobilize people either to go into politics or to support those that have the right principles, the right agendas to go into politics. And I'm seeing like 2018 as a start, but we're going to have a long way to go to leave this country a little better for the next generations. And I hope we all don't need to leave, because most people in Brazil cannot leave, and that will be another crisis in the region. We don't need that, and I really will fight hard not to have that. But we have all the models to look at to see how bad the situations can get, right?
Do we have time for one more question, Ted? Yep. Anyone?
Go for it. Yeah. I'm curious to hear what you're going to say.
We can talk to Veloso, there was a question here that I think you can answer. The role of the militia. You start. Introduce yourself also, please.
2 hours? I beg your pardon, but I'll do this in Portuguese. First of all, because Ivona is delighting us with her nice English, so I'm not going to be giving you a hard time to understand what I'm trying to say. So here it goes in Portuguese.
Hey, go ahead.
Better not raise there are a lot of Brazilians here also, so I've got to give this privilege to Brazilians, right? Eu estive à frente da polícia por 6 anos, 3 anos na chefia da polícia e 3 anos comandando a parte operacional da polícia do Rio. Participei de todos os planejamentos operacionais, desde os Jogos Mundiais Militares e todos os grandes eventos que aconteceram até as Olimpíadas.
So he's the former chief of police for Rio. So he was 3 years as chief of police, but also other 3 years in commanding the whole operation of the civil police, who is doing investigation in our model and arrests. And he was also just in the groups that prepared all the big events that Brazil had in the last years.
Eu gostaria de retornar à primeira pergunta, porque me parece que o eixo central desse encontro aqui são as eleições e o novo rumo que o Brasil pode tomar ou não a partir delas.
So you want to go back to the first question on like how elections can change the route for Brazil?
E nesse sentido, eu gostaria de fazer o seguinte afirmativa. O Brasil não pode olhar para o futuro e esquecer o passado, respondendo à sua pergunta. Porque a grande questão é como enfrentar, como os candidatos às eleições majoritárias enfrentam ao processo de eleição sem se deixar seduzir pela afirmativa de que precisamos mais armas e mais forças e mais prisão. Como levá-los a não se deixar seduzir por esse argumento que que está dividindo o Brasil.
So he said that we first, before looking to the future, we have to look at the past and think how we can just teach or just get into the discourse of the new candidates that we won't win this fight with more prison, more police and more force.
É por isso que não podemos olhar para o futuro e esquecer o passado. Nós já sabemos o que não funciona. Eu sou mestre em saber o que não funciona.
So we already know what doesn't work, so he's a master of knowing what doesn't work.
Então eu posso dizer o que não funciona. E o que não funciona é o que nós fizemos nas últimas décadas. Então me parece, muito embora pareça um desafio muito grande, um candidato não se seduzir esse argumento, ao mesmo tempo me parece que o objetivo da sociedade deve ser entender o que ela não pode continuar pedindo mais. E é exatamente o que a gente... vou refazer para tentar ficar mais fácil para o senhor. Vamos lá. O candidato a cargo majoritário que expresse uma necessidade de continuarmos fazendo o que viemos fazendo há décadas, tem que enfrentar a seguinte realidade: os dados, os números, o que nós fizemos no passado. Só as polícias do Rio, em um ano, prendem quase 50 mil pessoas. A cada ano, as polícias do Rio prendem quase 50 mil pessoas. Isso é um volume considerável. O nível de criminalidade não diminui. Isso não aconteceu em um ano, isso vem acontecendo nos últimos anos. Então, quando o candidato diz mais arma, mais prisão, mais força, mais encarceramento, ele precisa explicar por que isso não funcionou no passado até agora. Então, pode parecer um desafio enfrentar isso, mas não me parece tão difícil assim, porque antes que ele diga essa é a solução para o futuro, ele precisa dizer por que não foi a solução no passado.
So the candidates for the mayoral elections will have to, Veloso hopes they have to face the question, if they're defending more guns, more police, more prisons, why this didn't deliver in the last decade? So just confronting the numbers, saying Rio de Janeiro arrests over 50,000 people every year. The criminality indexes are not going down. So how to also confront the candidates that are just proposing all of the same, that like why then this didn't work for the last decades.
So, thank you.
Posso só adicionar
Just to add something here, because I'm a candidate and I talked about constructing prisons. But I know what Veloso was trying to say. I'm not talking about constructing more prisons to enforce imprisonments, and it's about increasing the quality of the prisons, It's another model, because the state is not inside the prison. The militia, the criminals, they control the prisons right now. The state makes is around the prison, not letting them go out, but inside the prisons they are the ones that they control that. So it's about constructing to have another model of prisons where we can put the state taking control of that, not letting them to recruit more criminals to their organizations.
just a comment there. We need more prisons because we have half of the prison population doesn't have a place to be. So I mean, there's no way, and this is a kind of a taboo in Brazil because it's not like right or left debate, because that's this kind of a false opposition. I mean, you need more places because we can't imprison those people in that condition. And they're also saying violent criminals have to be in jail. But my main difficulty in this agenda is like how to prioritize. And in many countries you have alternative sentencing. We know the US is, there's I would say the first one in the ranking in terms of prisons, but when you see cost, when you see also what generates when you just imprison people that could be doing alternative sentencing and giving back the community somehow if they're not violent. In the case of women in Brazil that are in prison, this is really the majority. They could be doing alternative sentencing and studying the lives and what happened to the children and just saying, wow, we're just creating more, feeling more the criminal situation.
A privatização do sistema carcerário não seria uma alternativa?
So he's asking about privatization. So we think that PPP, like the public-private partnerships, is a model. But and Minas Gerais has been doing that. We have just to be very careful on that. And I think the US will resonate what I'm going to say. What happens is that if you don't do well-regulated, you're going to create the lobby to increase sentences, and then you start the mandatory minimum sentences to huge crimes. So it just in our economy, it's really expensive to run a prison, and if you go to our prisons, it's like the worst nightmare everyone can imagine is to be in a prison in Brazil. Our former Minister of Justice, who was in charge of the penitentiary systems, said, I'd rather die than go to prison in Brazil. So, well, you're in charge, do something about it, So it's not a joke, it's something that the worst nightmare of everyone that could ever visit one. But I think we have to think about public-private partnerships because it's very expensive, it's very difficult to build prisons. Nobody wants to have a prison in their municipality. It's really a taboo issue in Brazil. But we need also to be very smart to learn from what happened in other places where, I would say we already have a very strong gun lobby that, by the way, was imported from NRA. NRA came to Brazil, and this is another story for another talk. I'm glad to tell. I was running from the civil society side a buyback campaign. We ran a national referendum in the country, and we saw how our groups there, the several groups were trained, and we just copy-paste NRA propaganda in Brazil. And today we have a very strong gun lobby, and it's hard. So the prison lobby, I'm just saying, you have to be rational. I'm just saying, nobody here wants violent criminals in the streets, of course not. And when we talk about what we talk, people say, oh, but you wanna just, you don't wanna punish people. No, we want to have the right people in jail, but when you see the proportionality of sentencing and the lack of investigation on the serious crimes, so we just say, well, we're not going to be solving anything in terms of what we all want, which is to live in a safe city, in a safe country.
In the militia.
In Rio, it's a Rio specific. Militia. For those that don't know, were created in the 90s as part of self-defense groups, to fight at that time the drug factions and help to create a more safer environment. It was supported by some politicians because they didn't read the Colombian history and then we don't look at the past. So it's more like the kind of a paramilitary Colombian situation, and that became huge in Rio. We have over 1 million people living under militias rules. And now militias are also dealing drugs. Militias are expanding their business to different sectors, providing illicit transportation, illicit cable TV, and many other services. So it's part of the fighting organized crime and corruption, because militias were firstly formed by former police, former firefighters, and so on. Today it's more diversified. But it's still, the genesis and still a good part is public security agents. So for us, it's number one in terms when you come to fighting police corruption and fighting organized crime. This is super linked. We've done a bulletin on the militias. I'll send it to you at the Igarapé Institute. So the last one was about that, so I can share with you.
Well, on that note, I think I have one takeaway from this discussion, and you correct me if I'm completely wrong. First, go vote in October.
Please.
And the second one is,
The embassy here, please.
yeah, and I'm registered in the consulate, I have to say. We have a representative from that. And it seems to me that obviously for every extremely complex problem, we find an extremely simple and wrong solution. We have to bear that in mind, right? It seems to me that this kind of encapsulates the argument that you made. Thank you so much for sharing your views and for all the participants, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Feel free to stay for a while. We'll bring out some more wine, and feel free to stay and ask questions and meet with the other participants who can still stay here. So thank you all very much.
Go on.